Greetings, fellow barbarians. You are listening to the Barbarian Lounge, and I am your host, Alan Odinson. I want to thank you for joining us. This is episode 5. This is part of our Prepping 101 series that we're doing, entitled Doomsday Marauders. That's right, Doomsday Marauders. We're going to discuss the dark side of prepping. Yes, just as prepping in general, it has its light side, there's also a dark side of it. Not a lot of people want to talk about it, but we're going to hit that today. First off, this episode is sponsored by Odinson Archery. You can check it out at odinsonarchery.com. A lot of different style bows for survival, for recreational shooting, or hunting. You can pick up arrows and other archery accessory gear there. You don't have to spend a ton of money to enjoy the sport of archery. The Brotherhood of the Bow, the membership into the Brotherhood of the Bow has never been so inexpensive as it is now. Go to Odinson Archery and check out those products there. Also, you can support the Barbarian Lounge by checking out some of the t-shirts we have running on Teespring right now. We just released a exclusive Blackbeard flag t-shirt. We will be doing, after this prepping series is over, we will be discussing in detail the Republic of Pirates. Not a lot of people know about that or really understand that vast history and culture down there. Everyone thinks of Pirates of the Caribbean and, R and all this other bullshit. But we're going to really hash out that culture. And what better way to start it off than a Blackbeard, exclusive Blackbeard t-shirt. Buying those shirts will help support the Barbarian Lounge, help us grow and bring more things to you. We're trying our best to keep that content coming, and we're trying to line up interviews and all kind of stuff right now, and every little bit of support helps. So, Doomsday Marauders. I've done numerous talks, numerous radio interviews with a couple of different shows regarding prepping, and I always get to this part of the dark side of prepping. And everyone's like, what? I've never heard of the dark side of prepping. Nobody talks about that. Everybody, when it comes to prepping, they go, oh, you need food, you need water, you need guns, you need this, you need that. But no one discusses the dark side. And we're going to hit that today. We're going to really move into this darkness of prepping. We're going to understand the types of people that may be your Doomsday Marauder. And yes, believe it or not, we may discuss how even you may become one of those people. Perhaps it'll be an educational experience for you. Perhaps it'll be cautionary. I don't know. So we'll see. That's up to you, I guess. So what is your Doomsday Marauder? Well, the Doomsday Marauder is your raider. Your guy who basically is, he's the thief. He's the guy who hasn't prepped anything, and he's laughed at you all along. He's the guy who said, oh man, you're crazy, everything's fine, the world's better than it's ever been. He's that guy. He may have a family, he may not have a family. But he's the guy who hasn't stored any water. He's the guy who hasn't stored any food. He's the guy that doesn't have any savings. He's the guy that has no particular skill set as it relates to survival. He's the guy who has no place to go. He may be your neighbor. He may be some group of people across the city. He may even be your family. Yeah, that's a difficult thing for people to swallow, that they may have to run into that. But it's very possible and very likely when you look throughout history and look at cultures who, poorer cultures who didn't have a manner of preparedness, you start to see these things happen. Take Venezuela. Venezuela is damn near close to Mad Max level of disaster there. The economy's falling apart. Food's running out. Antibiotics are running out. Power's going down. It's just a bad situation overall. We don't hear a whole lot about it here in the U.S. because, that's just somewhere else. But let me tell you, we could just as easily fall into something like that here. Remember, as I said last week, the only thing that's really keeping the U.S. economy afloat right now is the fact that we have the world reserve currency. And there are numerous countries right now fighting to get that removed. You could wake up tomorrow and find that your dollars, your savings, everything you have isn't worth anything anymore. So your Doomsday Marauders, the guy that hasn't prepared for that. And you may say, you know what, I know my neighbors, I know my family, but you know what, you got to put yourself in their shoes. And I can do that really simply by asking you this question. What would you do to feed your family? Think about that for a minute. What would you do to feed your family? To feed your child? To feed your wife? Would you just take all of your morals and put them on a high and say, you know what? I have faith something will come along and we'll just let it happen. As your wife or your child, your small baby, as they're sitting there starving, what would you do? Think about that. Ask yourself that question. And you may find, let's say you have no preps, you have nothing prepared whatsoever. You're a reasonably good guy. You hang out with the boys on the weekend. You guys watch football and everything's fun. And, those preppers, man, they're crazy. After all, you've watched Doomsday Preppers. Look how crazy those guys are. You don't want to be like that. So we're not going to prep. Man, you guys are crazy. Then something happens. It could be a natural disaster. It could be whatever. But let's say something like that happens and now you have nothing. And oh my God, the government's not taking care of me. There's no place to go. My money's not worth anything. What am I going to do? What would you do to ensure that your family did not starve? That's the underlying question in all this. So with your Doomsday Marauder types, if we were to develop a profile of what these people have, if you were looking at the Marauder type, I guess you could say, typically, if we're looking historically and we're looking even modern times in other third world countries, what do you find? You find that they tend to be heavily armed, and let's look at this country here, United States. I don't know the exact number, but it's well into the billions of firearms across the U.S. Statistically, when you look at places like Iraq, you look at places like Somalia and those areas, there's actually fewer guns in those countries than there are here right now. You see how violent it gets there when everything's falling apart for them. So I ask you, what do you think could happen here? Do you not think that people wouldn't be heavily armed? I'd say so. You look at the gun sales in the past few years, and the ammo sales, when the ammo crunch happened, and you saw all these people buying ammo, and you couldn't find ammo forever, for the longest time. What do you think most of those people were doing? They tend to have some sort of training. That's another bit. They tend to have some sort of training. Now, of course, naturally, you're going to have your guys who don't, and we're not talking about your average families here. We're going to get into types you run into later. They're typically going to have some training. If they don't have training to start with, a lot of times these people won't really have the sort of intent to really be a threat. So you'll find these people getting their training. A lot of times they'll have numbers. They'll have numbers on their side. They're going to have groups of people. What if you and your brothers are the type that haven't prepped? Just, you hang out on the weekends, whatever. Well, now all of your families are starving. You all of a sudden become kind of a makeshift tribe. You have a congruent goal. You don't want to have your family starve, so you're going to band together. And this typically is how you see these groups start to form and start to get bigger. If you look overseas, again, I can look back to overseas, you see these people tribally coming together with a common goal. And this tribe slowly starts to recruit and get bigger, because there's probably going to be more people. I say probably. There's definitely going to be more people who have not prepped as opposed to those who have prepped. Usually they're going to be quite resourceful. A lot of people think they're just going to be a bunch of savages running around, going nuts. But again, I point you back overseas again in a lot of these third world countries. It does not take long for people to figure out how to mount a weapon on a vehicle. It doesn't take a genius. Look at the criminal culture around you. most people, when they want to rob someplace, they don't pick a lock or bust a window out anymore. A lot of the gun shops find this out. They don't do that anymore. What they do is they take their vehicle, or they'll steal a vehicle, and ram it right through the front of the building while they have another vehicle waiting to steal the goods inside. So you're going to find a bit of resourcefulness in this sort of society, in this culture, especially if you start talking criminal culture. No one is more resourceful than criminals. Everybody seems to have this idea that criminals are just a bunch of idiots wandering around looking for their next fix. But when you really study criminal culture, and there's some people who have really gotten into this, and one of the interviews I want to set up in the future is possibly with Ed Calderon of Libre, Mexico. Nobody really has embraced and studied criminal culture like those guys. And you really can't discount the level of commitment and level of training that the criminal culture puts into their craft. So another thing you're going to run into is they're going to have a killer instinct, a will to commit violence. And even those people who typically would not be violent people, if push comes to shove, mark my words, as in the words of the Joker, you'll see these people will eat each other. That's what's going to happen. Even if you take, when we talked about prepping before, we talked about the idea of different levels of disaster, and one of those things was a personal disaster. Take, for instance, someone who's put in the same situation we're talking about here, where they haven't prepared for anything. Let's take somebody who's lost their job. Okay? They haven't prepared for anything. They're not ready for anything that's coming. They have no savings, they have no nothing, and now their family's starving. What are they gonna do? This is where you start seeing people who are stealing, who commit armed robberies, just small things like that. That's the same as the Doomsday Marauder. It's the same mindset. Normal, good people who are driven to commit acts of violence because they feel they have to. And in a way, maybe they do. Maybe they're in a situation where they have to. So, some different types of marauders, different marauder types. Naturally, you cannot talk about a raider or marauder type without talking about the gang. And when I mention gang, I'm talking street gangs. I'm talking, MS-13, who is pouring over the border right now. The unguarded border, you got MS-13 popping up all across the United States and all different states at the moment. Right here in the South, in South Carolina, we've got Myrtle Beach right now is starting to be flooded with MS-13. This is something you used to never ever see. Your gangs like the Bloods and Crips, all over the place here, all over the place. Your motorcycle clubs, some of these, some of these groups, these one percenter groups, could possibly be an issue. I tend to find that most of the time the MCs stick to themselves, but there are some bad apples out there. I would be much more concerned about groups like MS-13, Bloods and Crips before I would an MC. Another threat, talking about MS-13, think about your cartels. Everything goes to shit around here. You're really going to see those guys start to pour over the border. And you want to talk about resources, you want to talk about killer instinct, you want to talk numbers, being well-trained, and resourcefulness, and heavily armed. Man, there's no bigger threat than the cartels in that aspect. But so you're gonna find that any group that is a brotherhood that's tight, that's really tight, and they consider themselves brothers, I tend to see them as a threat in a situation like this, because even your tribe could even fall into the same category if your resources run dry, which we'll talk about towards the end. Any type of group like that is going to stick together, you're going to start to see those issues pop up. I tend to find that your street gangs, especially, as I said before, last episode, if you haven't listened, check it out. I mean, I dropped some knowledge in that one. But your street gangs are going to be in your cities, primarily to start with. Cities are dead zones. If you're in the city, you need to work on getting out. If you live in the city and can't leave, you need to have a strategy to get out. And that strategy does not need to be, I'm going to get in my car and leave. That's not going to be a viable solution Trust me when I tell you this. So the street gangs, what I find is that the street gangs are going to be very isolated, and they're slowly going to start to spread in a circular pattern probably. They're going to be absorbing resources, kind of like locusts. And once those resources dry up and they start to get control over an area, they're going to start to spread out even more. You're going to start to find even more of that. And I can tell you, at a lot of the gun shows and stuff that I see, you can spot out the street gangs in there if you know what you're looking for. And you see these members out, man, and I'm telling you, they're not buying food, they're not buying water, they're not getting land somewhere out in the sticks somewhere. Nope. What they're doing is they're purchasing guns, lots of guns. They're out buying lots of ammo, and trust me when I tell you this, they are buying it up. I see it all the time. You see these groups, obvious gangbangers with the colors. They're not hiding it the least bit, walking out of shows with bulk ammo and stuff like that. So you need to keep them. When they pay, they pull out a massive wad of cash and they pay for all this. You're going to find that sometimes these groups are going to start to spread in your rural communities that you think are safe. Well, you've kind of got a gangland Tet offensive. So if you don't know about the Tet offensive, look that up. I talked about that a little bit today on Facebook. But you kind of have these little sleeper cells all around in these rural areas. And while they may not be very formidable to start with, you may see members start to flock to them because they're going to be an image of power. They're going to be an image of stability and control. And people are going to be looking for help, and a lot of times these gangs are a great way for weaker people to feel stronger in these groups. And these groups may absorb them in just for the sheer numbers, because numbers are going to be big in situations like this. Now these next two I'm going to talk about, they're kind of going to be a dependent. It's going to be dependent upon how bad the situation really is. And the first group is going to be your military/military contractors. I know people are like, what? The military? No way. Military's got our back and everything. And yes, you're correct. In most instances, the military indeed does have your back. And this is where I say, how bad does it get? How prolonged is it going to be? In most instances, your military is going to be there trying to reestablish infrastructure, and it's not going to be an issue. The real issue you're going to have to worry about is your contractor types. And these are basically your mercs. And a lot of these groups aren't really preparing for any sort of really bad situation that is going to involve any sort of long-term prep. Like I said, 9 times out of 10, your military is going to be there establishing infrastructure. But let's not forget Katrina. In Katrina, you had military going door to door there, taking guns from people who are not committing crimes, who were holed up in their house, and they were arresting these people and taking their firearms. These people proved to be no threat. There was no issue, but because there was an ordinance issued, they disarmed them and left them basically defenseless against any sort of threats coming in. I don't know what you call that, but I call that a threat. I call that a threat to my family. Whether they believe they're doing good or not, they put my family and my people in a dangerous situation by disarming us. So in that sense, I see it as a threat. For your contractor types, look, not all those guys are horrible, terrible people and everything like that, but we live, where I live at here, there's tons of military bases, and I've had the chance to talk with a lot of these people. And some of these guys, man, they just kind of laugh and chuckle. You know, your older dudes, man, they're just as cool as they can be, but I find a lot of these younger guys, they just kind of get this let the bodies hit the floor mentality. And, man, these people, they don't think anything about taking what they need to survive. The good thing about military structure, and this would be like a horrible situation to where just everything's falling apart, which I will gladly admit is not likely. But in most situations, your military is going to have this. They're going to constantly get resupplied. So the chance of running into any issue where you're going to have military is very slim. The danger comes where militaries start carrying out orders underneath a corrupt government or a tyrannical government. Well, then we have a problem. For the most part, though, I would say you can trust most of your military people. A lot of military people know that they're in corruption, and I would hope and I would pray that our military brethren would choose to not follow such tyrannical orders, such as any sort of gun confiscation or anything like that. Most of those guys are shooters anyway. So another group that would be a threat would be, I hate to say it, my brothers, but law enforcement. Keep an eye out for these law enforcement guys, because I can tell you, most of your law enforcement are fine people. Some of my brothers are law enforcement, and I trust them with my life. But they will even tell you that some of these guys out there are very dangerous. The mentality that some of these guys have can be very dangerous. There's bad apples in every group, and this is the same issue as that you fall into with the military. There's bad apples in the group. A lot of times bad apples will spoil a bunch. But again, most situations, your law enforcement is going to be there to protect and serve, as it says. But depending on how bad the situation is, are these people, what if their families don't have any food? And I'm talking small and local areas. What if their families don't have any food? They have training. They have numbers. They have armament. They have a certain level of killer instinct, and they have resourcefulness. I would see that as a threat. And this isn't necessarily saying that as soon as everything goes bad, you're going to have to hide from the military and hide from law enforcement. I'm not saying that in the least bit. What I'm telling you is look for independent groups of bad apples to form together. So your military or contractor trained people, watch out for those guys, because they may go AWOL, form their own little group, and then you've got trouble. The same thing goes for your bad apples and law enforcement. And as I said with the military, I would hope and pray that all the good Leos out there would stand up against these corrupt Leos amongst them. This is one of the things I've always said. The best way for the police force to really take back its image that the media has skewed horribly, it angers me to no ends how the media has skewed our law enforcement officers out there who have very difficult, very hard jobs. I think the best way for the police system, the police force, to really bring its image back is to flesh out these bad apples. They really need to police themselves. I'm not a huge fan of this idea of this, brothers in blue, where you're a brotherhood and, your brothers can't do any wrong because, they're fellow law enforcement officers. That is not the mentality. That's a dangerous mentality. We need a mentality of law enforcement who are willing to say, you know what? We're going to step up. We're going to stand aside. We're not unconstitutional orders, which you also, just like the military, you swore an oath to. Those guys need to stand up, and those are the guys that I'm going to have their back. I'm going to be behind those guys. The same as the good guys in the military unit, the law enforcement units. These are the guys I'm going to stand behind. These bad apples that are going to get together, man, I don't want nothing to do with them. So, and you also going to have to worry about another type is you're going to have to worry about your family people. You're going to have to worry about those family groups that don't have the preps, but they've got plenty of training, they've got plenty of guns, they've got intent, and they need some food. Those are the guys you're going to have to watch out for. So, the danger becomes, and all these groups, as you see, when you see large groups who blindly follow an idea, if they follow this mentality of, my leader said so, and that can be a gang leader, or it can be a corrupt government leader. Whenever they start acting like drones and not thinking for themselves, and just just start thinking about their family and what their family is going to do. When they get this whole mentality of, I'm gonna take what's mine. I got to do what I got to do. That's when there's a threat involved for your average prepper. Now, I cannot put any label on whether or not I think their actions are justified, because once again, I ask that question: what would you do to save your family? So what are going to be the goals of these sorts of groups? Typically, it falls into two categories for the most part. Typically, they want to control resources: food, water, ammunition, these sorts of things, or they want to control territory. These two things tend to equal the control of people. If you have resources, if you have territory, you tend to have control over people. And this is what we start finding amongst these gangs. And again, this isn't just something that's popping up in the top of my head. There's a lot of history behind this. And let's hit a little bit. You know what? I keep talking about history. Let's hit a few of these historical groups real quick. Just give you a little background, because all this is based on different mentalities and different ideas. And again, as I said before, and I can't stress this enough, nothing I'm saying here is putting a finite stamp on how I see the morality of what these people are doing, because you'll hear me say this more than once, as I have already. What would you do to save your family, to feed your family? What would you do to survive? So historical. Well, I've talked before about me being following the heathen path. Let's talk the Vikings. Everybody wants to get into this whole Norse idea of this mentality where, I'm gonna follow Odin and I'm gonna die in battle and go to Valhalla, and they think of all the glory behind it. But let's break it down. The Vikings were raiders. That was their primary source of income, was being the Doomsday Marauder. And why was that? Well, in the areas where they lived at, very harsh winters. It's difficult to grow. It's difficult to live in these harsh environments. So, what could they do? What could they do to survive? They were typically very poor. They were poor people. Most of these guys had very few physical possessions, as far as luxury, if you want to say. But they needed to be these raiders in order for their culture and their society to flourish. And the only real way to get that was to steal supplies and raid these areas. Of course, they were taking, they took livestock, they took slaves. Most of the slaves were to resell, even though they would use them somewhat. They would resell all these things. So basically, they would set out in their boats, raid, steal, pillage, plunder, take all these things back to sell or to trade to get supplies so they could live and their families could survive. And you think again, what's the profile? We talked about it before. They had numbers. They were battle ready for sure. They had a religion that allowed them to really embrace the lifestyle that they lived. So all of the profile fits in that. So whenever you hear people talk about embracing, they're a Viking or whatever, well, are you a raider? Because that's part of the game. Everyone, like I said, everyone wants to glorify it. And I'm a heathen, so I understand this. And again, I'm not saying they were bad, because I asked you, would you, if you lived in that society, would you be willing to hit the road or hit the water, go over there, steal, pillage, plunder for people? Because let's be honest, it wasn't their people, right? So it's not my people, not my problem. We talked about that earlier, or we talked about that in the last episode. Not my people, not my problem. So, yeah, maybe they were justifying what they were doing. If not, there probably wouldn't even be any record of their existence, because they would have died very, very quickly. I talked a little bit before about how we're going to talk about pirates. Let's talk about piracy a bit. Really, when you look at at piracy, and I don't want to get too much into this because we're going to talk about this before. Piracy was created they were your military contractors initially. They were known as privateers. They were legal thieves. A lot of times the governments couldn't afford the Navy to do all of their work, so they would hire these privateers. Say the English would hire privateers to rob the Spanish, and the Spanish would do the same. So they were basically legal thieves. They got a license and everything that said you have a license to steal. So what ended up happening is, to make a long story short, and trust me, it is a long story, a very interesting story that we will definitely get into, and I think everyone will just be fascinated by the culture. But after the war ended, these people didn't have a job. They had no job whatsoever, because now what they were doing was illegal, punishable by death. So they did what they only knew how to do. Only difference is they didn't just pick the Spanish to steal from. They stole from everybody because it was what they had to do. And this is what a lot of people don't really get. They were the military contractors. They had all the training, they had all the experience, they had the numbers, they had the equipment, they were heavily armed. They weren't necessarily, to start off with, these horrible people. But hey, tough times breeds tough people. So then you had them unify eventually against Europe, really. I mean, we're not just talking England. You had the English, the Spanish. They unified against all these groups to start a republic of pirates. They were basically the first colonist before the American colonists even dreamt of revolution. These guys did it first. So, again, we say, were they justified in doing what they were doing? Well, they were legal thieves. It's kind of weird for the government to tell you this is legal to do, and then all of a sudden, because it doesn't fit your profit scheme anymore, to say no, you can't do that. So I ask you the same thing about the contractors and the people who have this training. Again, not all of them are bad. Not all of the privateers, not all of the pirates were these horrible people. But there were a few bad apples in the bunch who didn't have any trouble utilizing the skills that they had learned and gathering a group together to really raise hell in the Caribbean and other parts of the world as well, which we'll talk about. Let's hit some modern piracy, or even your modern raiders. And for that, you don't have to look much further than Somalia. And we all hear about the issue that's going on with Somalia. We've heard about it forever. And basically that was bred out of a massive civil war that started in 1980. And guess what, folks? It's still going on today. Yes, that's right. The Somali civil war is still going on today. Absolutely unbelievable. You have a country in shambles, no real working, functional government that's doing anything. You have a society that really doesn't want to work, mass death. It's a common thing around there for these people. So you have this society whose only form, which I didn't even know this until recently when I was actually researching this episode, but you have this society whose really only source of income at the time in this massive war that's going on was fishing. Well, what ended up happening is when the government fell apart, you had all these different Western countries, European countries. They moved into this area and started illegally fishing the area. Well, they had massive boats, massive hooks, and they tended to be armed in a lot of instances. Well, what ended up happening is they ended up destroying the fishing nets that the Somali people had in that area. They destroyed all this stuff, overfished the area. There's hardly anything left. So what you have is a bunch of people who are pissed off that their livelihood was gone. Well, then you had the local militia get riled up in the area, and they started hiring, guess what, privateers. I don't know if they'd really technically be considered privateers because it wasn't legal, but these people started hijacking vessels in the area as a result of what was going on. And, your family's starving. I'm definitely not justifying what they did, but I can understand it. I understand where that came from. But now, those things have blown up into just ridiculous proportions to where the pirates in those areas are just running over. They're running over with money right now. I think it's $1 billion trade. And some of it's give back to the people, but a lot of it's just become typical human behavior where you don't want to help anybody out. But, again, they were, what are the profile of these people? They had congruent goals naturally. They were, they're heavily armed. They had the intent behind it. All of those things we talked about earlier. They had the numbers. So this becomes an issue. Granted, a lot of that's been stifled now because the community has risen up, which is absolutely a good thing. But in those areas, too, you have a lot of ground raiders. Man, it doesn't take very long for people in bad situations, even in third world countries like that. It does not take them long to figure out how to mount a weapon to a vehicle and use it. It's unbelievable. I had a story. I had a friend of mine years ago when I was in the nuclear security field. I had a friend of mine who hadn't been back from Iraq very long, and we were discussing, which this was something you do in the nuclear security world, is where you can't get much into it, but basically you war game different attacks. And he was telling us about how these guys, it did not take them long to come up with a homemade, a lot of the insurgents around there, a homemade mortar. And they had basically like a steel pipe mounted into the back of a truck at an angle with a cap on the end of it with a nail at the bottom. So they could drop mortar rounds into this thing. Some of them were actual mortar rounds. Some of them were crude homemade stuff, but said that they were actually able to raise hell with these homemade mortars. Now, some of them blew themselves up, but they all of a sudden had a mobile vehicle that had the ability to launch artillery. I mean, think about that for a second. That's unbelievable. Do you not think that people cannot figure these sorts of things out here? I mean, we live in the information age, people. All you got to do is start typing into Google. Well, you may get a visit from the NSA or the FBI, but I mean, it doesn't take much to figure these things out. And to think that there aren't resourceful people out there who could figure this out, you're dreaming. You're absolutely dreaming. And there's other groups, the Native Americans, the Aztecs, and you see raiding throughout history. You see tribes of people who are poor, they don't have a lot of supplies, maybe they're lacking territory or whatever. Maybe they're just better at fighting than they are growing shit. You start to see these people come together and taking from weaker people. So all these groups, they share a common goal, and they don't think anything about taking from you. So let's talk about ways to defend against these Doomsday Marauders, these raider types of people. Let's talk about things we can do as preppers, if you are the prepper mentality, things you can do to protect your family and your people. Right off the bat, one of the things you need to figure out right away is you need to establish prepper protocols for your group, for your family, whatever it may be. And I tend to look at it as 6 different protocols. Naturally, you could add more, take some away. But it's 6 protocols divided into groups of 3. It divided into 2 groups with 3 each group. And it's the before and the after group. So protocols for before. This is before shit hits the fan. This is during the preparatory phase. The first one. No one knows what we have. Very simple. After shit hits the fan, if you've been telling people, oh, I'm a prepper and I got water stored and I got this and I got that, where do you think the people who don't have shit are going to come? They're going to come to you. And they may not have this idea of being an aggressive type of person, but loose lips cause issue. They may not be the type to raid you, but they may talk just in general. Somebody may be talking about prepping, and they may be around people who you don't know, who may be unsavory, that say, yeah, so-and-so's got some water and a bunch of food stored, and he's got a bunch of ammunition. That person makes a mental note when shit hits the fan. Guess whose house they're coming to? Maybe their boys are going to come pay you a visit. So no one knows what we have. The next one, no one knows how we train. Don't go telling people all the different training methods that you have to prepare yourself against raiders. These people on Doomsday Preppers are the biggest bunch of ass clowns I've ever seen in my life. No protocols there. Everybody knows what they're doing, how they're ready, how they're prepared, and you can say, oh, well, I'm not going to tell everybody everything what I'm doing. You give people a general idea, they'll start to establish some sort of strategy to come at you. I think about the people on that stupid show, Doomsday Castle. Bunch of weak ninnies if I've ever seen any. And these guys set up this castle, told everybody where they were at, and now you can actually punch in the coordinates on Google Earth and get a overhead view of the Doomsday Castle right now. And we know all the protocols and everything they've got set, so don't tell people how you train. Don't tell people how, exactly. If you want to tell people you took a class, that's fine, but don't give them all the ins and outs of how you or your group or your family trains or responds to threats. Don't tell them that. The other one is no one knows where we go. That's the third one. Don't tell people where you're going to go, where your bug out's going to be, where you've got your supplies hidden, or we're going to stay home, or no, we're going to hit my cousin's place in the woods. Don't tell them that, because they're going to follow you. I can't stress this enough. So the fourth one, and this moves us to our second group of after. This is after shit hits the fan. 3 things again. The first one is no one gets in the day after. And some people may not fall into this mindset, but it's mine. No one gets in the day after. If you were not there the day before, you will not get in the day after. I don't have enough food. I don't have enough water. I don't have enough means to save everybody. If you were not my brother before, you are not going to be my brother after. The next one is no one gets supplies. Nobody gets food. Nobody gets water, etc. Again, people say, well, what about barter or whatever? Well, okay, let's say, for instance, you give a guy comes up and says, look, man, my family's starving. Can I just get something? And you give him 3 cans of food, okay? And you say, move along. He moves along, and he meets somebody else. And they say, hey, where'd you get that food from? Oh, I got it from this place. And now more people start coming. It's the same way as if you feed a dog or give a dog water. They're going to come back where they know they're going to be fed and they know they're going to get water. Even when this person runs out, they may show back up. Then when you turn them away, they may not be too happy about that. And they may come back with some other people and say, you know what, man, fuck that guy. Let's go back. They got some shit. I know they don't have a lot of people or whatever, and I know the layout of the area. Let's go take what they got. Hell with that. So no one gets supplies. And my last one is everyone is a threat. If you're not behind that wall, I'm going to view you as a threat. And this is just a safety mechanism. You cannot be trustworthy. You have to really take your level of morality and question it beforehand. I talked about this at length in the last episode. Question these morals. And this is something where your religious background is going to come in. People may take advantage of the Christian mindset of giving unto others. They may take advantage of that. If they know that you're a devout Christian, they may use that against you. Come to a heathen household, you're going to get met with something else, let me tell you that. So that's more of when I say that for my Christian brothers and sisters out there, for you guys, don't let people use your morality against you. You need to have those morals set and know what you're going to do before anything happens. Once you know this, it's not something you're going to have to, it's not a question or a hesitation you're going to have to answer on that day, should that day arise. If you are planning on fighting against the Doomsday Marauder, there's 2 types of defense you need to think about. And I discussed this a little bit in the last episode, but I'm going to expand on it a little bit more. 2 types of defenses you have to decide, and you need to go ahead and decide this now. And that is an overt defense or a covert defense. Now, in order to decide this, and let me just define those real quick. Basically, an overt defense is, we're here to fight. A covert defense is, I don't want you to know I'm here. It's the simplest way I can think to put it. So, in order to really decide which of these you're going to want to do. You're going to need to do a few things. First off, you're going to need to decide the skill level of your group. What type of people do you have? What type of people have your back? Do you have people who have seen combat? Do you have people with a mindset for violence? Do you have people who are regular shooters? Are they pistol shooters, rifle shooters? Are they solid under stress? Are they physically fit? These are different aspects you need to think about. Do they have multiple skills? Are they a better medic than they are a shooter? These are things you got to think about. And by thinking of this, it allows you to establish the strength of your group. Naturally, a stronger group is going to yield better results in an overt defense. If you're one person, if you're a tribe of one, or a lone wolf, I guess you could say. You can't really call it a tribe of one. That's kind of a misnomer. But if you're a lone wolf, I would highly advise you, I don't care who you think you are, you don't need to do anything else. Well, you need to do two things. One, either get really good at your covert defense, or two, find a group. Those are basically your only options as the lone wolf. So if you're a family, let's take a family. If you're a family and it's you, your wife, and your 3 small children, let's go with that. In that situation, let's say that you're a fucking tactical operator, man. You've been to lots of classes, you got medical skills, you know what you're doing, and man, in most situations, you got a rifle, you got body armor, man, you are set to go. In most situations, you're gonna mow most people down. In the situation you're in, let's say your wife, she's an average shooter, she's never really been into any fights or anything. Or I'll tell you what, we'll up the ante a little bit. Let's say your wife is the same as you, man. She's been to all the classes you've been to, she's a fucking operator. You got those small children, and you are attacked by a gang of 5 people. Overt or covert? What do you think? Well, there's a lot of different factors that can fall into account, but if you're just analyzing the skill of your group versus the skill of numbers, I would say that you, depending on your setup of your home and your location, you've got a chance. However, also understand it's very difficult to defend all sides of your home. If you have a larger group, a gang of 10 or more, you're probably going to die. So these are things to think about, and that brings up another thing with deciding which one to use. What's your location? Are you in the mountains? Are you on the top of a mountain somewhere? Are you in a neighborhood? Quiet neighborhood, everybody's cool. What's your location on the street? Is there a road that runs next to yours? Do you have trees on the side? Is there another house next to you? Or houses on both sides? Is the front yard completely open? Is there a big field? All these things you have to take into account. It falls into the categories. Is your castle defendable? So, you got to realistically analyze the threat. What sort of threat is it going to be? What am I most likely going to run into? You can't account for all threats, but you can get a general idea, judging by the area around you and the people, knowing the people around you, what sort of threat you're going to run into. There's a lot of benefits to certain locations. Mountain locations or mountain or woods. I just throw those two together. I hear a lot of people talking about going to the mountains. It's better than the city naturally. It's better than even a rural community. However, your mountain location, your visibility can be very, very slim. Just as the same way as it conceals you, it also conceals them. So understand those factors in there. If you're in a house, in a neighborhood, do I have a house on each side? Do I have a road running next to my house? That could be they could take 2 vehicles and ram each side of my house, and shock and awe, it's going to be very tough to defend against. So ask yourself these hard questions, and most of all, you've really got to drop that ego, man. you've got to drop that ego, because as men, we want to say to ourselves, I'm going to fight, I'm going to defend my family no matter what. Well, yes, I understand that, but what's the better defense for your family? Keeping them safe. Your overall goal is to defend your family. And there is absolutely nothing wrong defending your family, defending your brothers or whatever. I can't think of a better way to die. Most of us aren't privy to having a good death. That's about as good a death that you can possibly ask for. But you also have to be able to drop that ego to know what's the best defense and what's the best result that I'm looking for to prolong the life of my family. Once these questions are answered, then you can move on to strategies. So for strategies, for our overt or covert, let's go ahead and talk about overt defense first, because let's be honest, that's what all of us want to do, and that's the most fun out of everything, right? I mean, hell, we're not storing all this shit for nothing, right? We're buying weapons and ammo and getting trained and buying body armor and food and water. Man, we're looking for a fight, right? We're heading to Valhalla one way or another. So let's talk about that overt defense. In order to pull off a good overt defense, you need to have a massive show of force. Meaning that whenever they come up to the house, they look, or even at a distance, because you probably don't want them close up to your house, but when they see your house, they say, holy shit, we don't want that fight. That's the idea behind that massive show of force. This is where you have your house fortified, you have obvious sniper nest, you have obvious that they can see people walking around with weapons, ammunition, the windows are boarded up with slots in them, ready for the fight. This is the idea. You want everybody to know that when they pull up to your place, that we're going to be in for a fight. And this is only really going to be beneficial if you have a large enough group to defend it. A house defended by two people, even two well-trained people, a house defended by two well-trained people is almost always going to be a dead man's game. I know all of us like to think we're immortal and everything, but it's almost always going to be a dead man's game. If you war game this with somebody with a mindset, we're going to run some scenarios later. If you war game this with somebody with that criminal mindset, you're going to find that in most situations, you're going to lose. I don't care how badass you think you are. If the numbers game comes up against you, you can only hold out so long. Take the 300 Spartans, right? Bunch of badasses. And they slaughtered en masse Xerxes' men. But eventually they were overcome by the numbers game. So if you've got a large group of people that can hold up that numbers game, there you go. And naturally you're going to need to fortify your area accordingly. Whether it's a house or whatever, you're going to need things like a good thing that a lot of people don't think about, especially if you've got like a farmhouse area. You can take those large big ass rolls of hay, those big bales, and pre-position those around your home. Selectively position them, because you don't want to create cover for people, but what you're doing is you start disrupting line of sight. You start and less line of sight for them to see you, so you can move around your property and not have to worry about being seen by people who might be reconning the area. It might be difficult for them to see what's going on behind the walls, if you want to say there. You can also create fields of fire with these pre-positioned bales of hay. You can funnel people into certain areas. Just think about that. And for the most part, especially if you're in a farming community, you can set up these bales of hay, and this doesn't look like any sort of overt defense. So this is something that you can have set up and pre-positioned already, and it doesn't look particularly threatening. So you've got it's ready for before. As soon as shit hits the fan, you don't have to move anything around. It's already set up and ready. That's just something you can think about. Think about large pieces of equipment. Farm equipment's great for closing off roads, entranceways to your house. You see a lot of these places that will have entranceways set up and a gate at the entranceway, and then there's a ditch on each side of it. And you see that, and you say, well, what's the use of that little gate? Someone could just hop around it. That's absolutely right, they can. However, they cannot take a vehicle into your yard or into your property because the ditch has got them blocked on both sides. That's all that's for, is to prevent anyone from driving into the property. And if you've got a raiding group, if they have to leave their vehicle to come to you, that's a benefit. Because as I said before, I talked about driving the vehicle through the home or through the fortification. There you go. That's something that's blocked. You've got all of that blocked off, and now they're going to have to come forward or fight you from that position far away. So that prevents that shock and awe approach of just ramming through or ripping the door off. I've heard instances of guys taking some rebar and some chain, big hunk of rebar on chain, attaching it to a trailer hitch or attached to their vehicle, tossing it through a window or a door, and then just hauling ass and ripping the whole wall out. So think about things like that. You may want to add barbed wire barriers, just some simple 2x4s screwed or nailed together with barbed wire wrapped around them. This can be a line of defense as someone's coming in. This will prevent people. It'll slow them down. When I say barbed wire, I say barbed wire. Ideally, you want razor wire. That would be even better. But basically what you're doing is just trying to prevent that bum rush and anything to slow them down. Even having hedges underneath your windows full of sticker bushes will prevent people from just coming right up to the window. This is just simple home defense stuff, even for preventing against criminals. So we're not talking about just a complete grid down situation. We're talking about defending your home in general. And naturally, you can have more obvious things set up, sniper nests where people can see what's, that they get this idea of a nest of people there, or a sniper nest or a crow's nest or something like that. Granted, you are kind of throwing your hand a little bit, but however, if people are reconning and they see snipers, man, they're not going to want anything to do with that. Plus, having a sniper's nest is already a good idea if you got somebody that's skilled with a long rifle. And for that, they don't have to be Chris Kyle or anybody. Some of the deer hunters I know are some of the best shots at longer ranges than you want to see, and a lot of these guys are shooting, big rounds, larger rounds, your 300 Win Mag and your 7mm, stuff like that. These guys are rocking rounds like that, and they can send them 300 plus yards no problem. So, have these things set up so they can see a threat at a distance, and other people who are around, they say, man, that is not the house we want to mess with. Naturally, there are a ton other things you can do as well, but these are just a general guidelines for setting up. You can set up mirrors so you can see around, different pre-positioned mirrors. You can set up to prevent people from breaching the door. There are things you can do, such as taking just a little quickie here. You can take a net or some sort of maybe like a casting net, put it over the door, so a lot of times when people breach a door, they'll pop the hinges or whatever and let it fall. Well, if that net's there, it prevents that dynamic sort of entry. The door can't fall, so the door just kind of hangs there for a second. It doesn't have to be strong, but basically it clogs that dynamic entry. Just little things like that. Alright guys, due to time constraints, we had to cut this episode short. This was nearly a 2-hour talk, so we had to chop it up a little bit to make it a little more consumable for our network. But if you'd like to hear the episode in its entirety and hear all of the power that we give you on this show, please download it at thebarbarianlounge.podbean.com, and you can hear the show in its entirety. Thank you for joining us. This is your host, Alan Odinson, and the Barbarian Lounge is closed.